Hey everyone, so welcome to my recording for learning Ajax. Took a lot longer than I expected, so hopefully this helps you. So what is the point of Ajax? Well, if you remember back to the end of Comp 233, we did that assignment coursework 4, which was the online quiz theme. And kind of the way it worked is we started off with an index PHP page, which we went to at the very beginning, and that might have had a login page or whatever. And if we want to process, say, start a quiz, what we'd do is from our index PHP page, we would go and along to our quiz PHP page. So we send some data into the quiz PHP page. The quiz PHP page then queries the database, okay? And then the information is returned back to the quiz PHP, which then generates all the HTML code inside it, and the quiz PHP file is the file that gets displayed to the user once it's generated all the HTML tags and code through PHP. And if you wanted to reload a part of the quiz, you basically had to reload the whole page. And so obviously if there's lots of things on the page, it can be quite slow in updating, as well as quite bandwidth intensive, because there's a lot of data that doesn't change that you need to reload again. So the whole point of Ajax is that you only load the content which is changing, so you only reload the content which is changing. Any content that hasn't changed, you don't reload it, and so it just stays kind of static, I guess. So what we're going to do in the first assignment for Comp 333 is we're going to have an index page that will do everything. Okay, so logging in, displaying the stocks, all that kind of stuff. But what it will do is when you want to do something, you want to get some information from the database, what it will do is your index HTML will then connect to a PHP file, so process.php, but that file doesn't create a complete web page. All the process.php file will do is it sets up all the database connection stuff, it connects to the database and sends a query in, and the database then returns the data as a result set to our process.php file. The process.php file then uses PHP to create all the HTML tags it needs for displaying just that data, not the whole page. So the process.php only deals with how is it going to display just the data returned back from the database. What it does is it creates all the HTML tags and codes and inserts the data from inserts information from the data returned back from the database into all of those HTML codes that it creates. And instead of using process.php to display that data to the user, all of the tags and stuff is sent back to our index HTML page, and only that part of the page actually changes. Okay, so index HTML is where we display the information through the use of JavaScript. So you're probably wondering where JavaScript comes in. Well, JavaScript will be done in the HTML page. Even though the JavaScript might be in a separate file, we still include that into the HTML page. Okay, so effectively the JavaScript is running on our HTML page. So we connect to the process.php, we send an Ajax request to it, it then connects to the database to ask for a query, the database returns back data back to the process.php, it then creates all the HTML code that you want for displaying your data, it sends it back to the index.html, and using JavaScript it then inserts all of the code from process.php into your page to update it. So that's essentially how Ajax works. So let's have a look at an example. So I've got our friendly brackets editor here. So you'll see I've included the scripts.js script, and I'll post all these files on Moodle for you to play around with later. Not on Moodle, on our Facebook page. In the body, I've just got a button called Process, and when I click, when I do a click on it, I've got the on-click event set up so that it calls a JavaScript method or JavaScript function called process. Okay, so when I click the button, it's going to go into the JavaScript code and call the process function. I've also got a div for displaying our data when we retrieve it back from the database, and I've given it an ID called display. Okay, so that's the, just make sure it was recording. So that's the name, the ID for that div. So all of our content is going to be displayed in this div. Initially it's going to be empty because I don't want anything in it, but you could have some stuff in it to start with, and then later on we'll kind of get rid of it. So that's the start of our HTML page. So let's have a look at what we have in the scripts.js file. Nothing, yay. Okay, so in the scripts.js, what we want to do is essentially get our process function set up. Now, okay, let me do the process function first. So we want to go function. Was it lowercase p or capital P? It is a lowercase p for that function name. The process. Oops. Okay, so remember in the code from the lectures and so on, all the examples, we need to create an ajax request object. Now you could create the ajax request object here, but that means it's only available in this function, and it's not available later on in the function that's used to display the data. Okay, so you need two functions, one function to make the ajax request and one function to handle all the information coming back from the database, from the PHP file from the database. So you need two functions to do it properly. So we can't create the variable here, we need to create it at global scope, which means we need to create it at the very beginning. Okay, so that's why the ajax request object or variable goes up here. So we go var ajax request equals new, and we're creating a new XML HTTP request. There you go. That's really nice. So brackets is being helpful there. Okay, so that creates our variable called ajax request, and creating a new HTML request object. So let's put a comment here. Creating an ajax request object that we can use in our code. Okay, now in Judy's lecture notes, she uses a variable to specify the URL of the PHP page that's going to be handling the database connection stuff. You can do that as well, so might as well try it. So we go var, let's call it URL, equals, and then you just put in the name of your script. So I think I've got all my scripts at the same level, so there's nothing in the JavaScript folder. In fact, let me just delete that JavaScript folder. So they're all at the same level, so there's no subfolders to worry about, so I'm not going to bother with that. So all we need to do is call the process.php file. So the URL we're going to call when we make the ajax request is process.php. Okay, so let me put a comment. Name of the PHP file to handle the ajax request. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the next step is we want to set up what's called a callback function. Now it's a kind of a fancy term. All that means is we need to tell the ajax request object which function to call when the data has been retrieved. Okay, so when the data is retrieved, we're not going to display do anything with the information in the process function. We need a separate function that will handle displaying the information returned back. So we want to go ajax request dot on ready state change. I'm not really too sure what all that name means, but I assume it means that when the state of the ajax request changes to a ready state, that it's ready because all information has been received. When that occurs, we want to give it the name of the function that we're going to call. So let's call a function called display data. Don't have to put round brackets after it because we're not actually calling a function here. All we're doing is we're saying make the onReady state change property equal to the name of the function that's going to handle displaying the data. So let me see if I can write a comment for that. Set the name of the function that will handle displaying the data returned back from the ajax request. I think that sounds pretty reasonable. Alright, so that's the first thing, because if you don't have that, then there's no function to handle the data coming back, and then nothing will get displayed. Okay, so that's display data. The next step is to open the requester. So let me just go through W3 schools and just kind of talk about what this does. So to send a request to a server, you need to use the open and the send methods of our request object. So this is the open part. So here's the description. The method is a type of request. Do you want to use a get or a post? Now remember the differences between those two things from 233. The differences are still the same when we use it for Ajax. Alright. URL is the name, is the server or the location of the file that's going to handle the request. And then we put either true if we want an asynchronous connection, or false, or asynchronous request, or false if we want a synchronous request. So obviously we need to use asynchronous for the assignment, so we want to make sure we use true there. Once we've done that, we can then use send. Okay, and if you're using get, you leave send empty because you don't pass anything with get. If you use post, then you can put a string in the send function call because you need to pass some information using post. Okay, so in W3 schools, it's got a little bit of information about when you should use get, when you should use post. So maybe you can have a read of that at some point. I'm pretty sure we can just use get for this particular assignment, although maybe not, because maybe if we're doing the username and password we might want to use post, but we'll get to that later. Let's just stick with get at this stage so that we can get into doing the rest of this. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to talk about here. No, I'll come back to the other stuff. Okay, so once we've done that, we need to call the open method to indicate the method of connection. Indicate the method of connection. So we want to go ajax request, which is the name of our ajax object, dot open. And we want to use get, so get, comma, then the name of the file that's going to be handling this. So this is where we can use our URL variable. So we can go URL, comma, and then finally true if we want asynchronous, false if we want synchronous. So we want asynchronous, so just go true. Okay, so that does that, and then we can send the request by going ajax request dot send, and we don't need to put anything in the brackets because we're using get. So that is all you need to do to make an ajax request. So create your object at global scope, maybe set up a variable with the name of the file to do the handling, set up the onReady state change property to equal the function that's going to be called to handle when the data comes back, and set up the method of connection using open, and then send the request. Now if we just run this, nothing's going to happen because we haven't got the display data function to actually change our HTML page to actually display the information. So we need to create that function before it will all work. So function display data. Okay, now when you're dealing with the information coming, so what's happening is that while So when we do the send command, the process function terminates at that point. And what happens is your browser is now just waiting for the information to be returned back from our process.php file. When it does get that information returned back, it then goes, oh hey, I've got this information from the process.php file. I know the function that is needed to handle that data, so it then calls this function, and in here you can then do what you want with that information. So there's a couple of things we need to check for before we can actually display the data in our web page. So if I just find here, I think it's the next chapter. No, next one. Here we go. So the ready state holds a number which tells you the status of your HTTP, of your AJAX request. 0, it's not been initialized. 1, server connection was established. 2, the request was received. 3, processing the request. And 4, the request is finished and the response is ready and it's returned back the information. So you only want to display the data if the ready state property has the value 4 in it. And the other thing was the status. If the status number property is equal to 200, then everything was okay and we should go ahead and display the data. If the status number is 404, then the page wasn't found and obviously we shouldn't display anything. Okay, so in W3 Schools there's kind of an example of doing that, but we can break it up into 2 separate if statements to make it easier to do error messages and stuff. So what we want to do is use an if statement to check the ready state property of our request object. So we want to go if ajax request dot ready state equals 4, then we know that the information was retrieved correctly. Else we could display an alert or some other way of displaying an error message by maybe displaying something on your page. So just go alert, alert, an error has occurred, so the user knows what's going on. Okay. If ready state is equal to 4, we still need to check the status and make sure that that equals 200. So if ajax request dot status equals 200, then we know that everything's okay, we should proceed. Else an error has occurred and we could do a different error message maybe. I'll just use the same error message, but you know, there are different types of errors, so we should probably have different error messages in here. Okay, so if ready state is equal to 4 and the status is equal to 200, everything is great and we can go ahead and process the response. Now what we want to do is change the contents of this div by dynamically putting new content in it through JavaScript. Okay, so we're not using PHP to change the div, we're using JavaScript, and the PHP is just returning the code to stick into that div. So all we need to do, well, you could do, if you remember back to the DOM manipulation stuff in Comp 233, where we did the get element by ID, and we could do things like create a new node, create a new text node, append it to the last child of the current node we're at, or create a new table node and append it to the current node that we're at. We could do it that way using DOM manipulation, or we could use inner HTML. So we didn't really use inner HTML in Comp 233 because they wanted us to practice using the DOM and stuff. But for the assignment, Judy seems to be happy for us to use inner HTML. So that's what we're going to use, and it does make it a bit easier for us, which is nice. So remember, the div ID is display. So the first thing we want to do is get access to that div by using the document.getElementById. So hopefully all this JavaScript is kind of coming back to you. I should put some comments in here. Check if the ready state property is okay. Check if the status property is okay. Now we want to change the contents of the display div by using inner HTML to replace any HTML in the div with new HTML. So if there was any HTML in the div on the web page, all of that gets wiped with the new contents of what we're putting into the inner HTML property. So we want to go get element by ID, and then in here we put the name of the ID, which is just display. Okay, so that gets us element to the div element in the code. Then I can go dot, and then I can put an inner HTML to access the inner HTML of that particular div, because we've done the get element by ID. All I now need to do is make it equal to the data that's returned back in our ajax request object. So we go ajax request dot, and because we're not using XML, we will be using the status text. Okay, so response text is for when things are returned back in XML. Response text is when we get things back through normal HTML. If you want to get things back through XML, if I just go back to W3 Schools, we use the response, response XML property. Okay, so the response XML property allows you to get information back as XML tags. Response text property is just a big string that contains all of the PHP tags, all of the HTML tags created for PHP. It's just one big long string with all of your tags together. Okay, so let's go back to brackets, and we want to fill the rest of this in. Dot response text. So you see there's response XML for XML information, response text for just normal HTML. So that's all you need to do. So get the div by going get element by ID on its ID, then go dot inner HTML to access its inner HTML, and then replace that HTML with what's returned back through the ajax request. Okay, so what we can do is now kind of test it, but we need to put something into our process PHP file. So here's our process PHP file, which I'm just going to get rid of all of that. So at this stage, let's just put in some text. What would be some good text we could put in? Let's put in something like English is awesome, because I am. So when we call the PHP file, it's not doing any database connection stuff. All it's going to do is return back what's inside the PHP file as this piece of text. So that piece of text is returned back through the ajax request. That piece of text is inside the response.text property when the request is returned back, and then it's put into the inner HTML, so we'll just see Nilish is awesome on that page. So fingers crossed, we can now test it. So remember, to test it, we need to be running either web app in the lab or using MAMP. So I'm using MAMP here. So if I go to here and go to localhost, go to Ajax example, go to my web page HTML. So here's my button. If I click it, an error has occurred. Oh, that's a bit strange. It did actually do that, but why did it come up with an error has occurred? That's interesting. That's very strange. Let me run that again and see if it does it again. Yes. Well, it didn't happen last time on my other code, so that's really strange. Display data, because it only must have done that if these are not true, but then why did it do this? That's really strange. Oh well, I hope someone can figure out what I've done wrong. Okay, I might just pause the recording and then I'll come back once I figure out what's going on. Alright, so I figured out what's going on. Because I put an else for the ajax request ready state, remember that the ready state can be different stages of the ajax request. So actually looking through Judy's note, she doesn't have an else for that, so we'll take the else out because I don't think you need an else for that first if statement. So now if I run that, click the button and we get nil is awesome. Okay, so it's just repeating back what we have in the PHP file, but it's done through an ajax request. The PHP file is not displaying that, it's the HTML page itself that's displaying that through our JavaScript here. Okay, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of kind of how the ajax works. So now in our PHP file you can start to include HTML tags. Okay, so let's see an example where we use the PHP file to have some HTML tag in it. So let's make it into a proper PHP file. So PHP, and then in the PHP tag, and now you can do things like this to include tags into your PHP. Okay, there's some. We put something like he deserves some H1 chocolate, hint hint, /H1. So now our PHP file is returning back HTML code, and remember that HTML code will then go into the div through the inner HTML, and it replaces your display div, the contents of the display div, with this HTML code. So let's try that and see what happens. So go back to here, press F5, an error has occurred, internal server error. Network error, that's strange. Oh, something's happened to MAMP. Okay, let's quit that, and I'll run MAMP again. Yeah, I know, my desktop's really messy. I bet your desktop is messy too. Okay, so let's go back. Reload that. No, what's happened? Have I got some errors in my code? No. PHP. That all looks good. Alright, let's just put this back to what was before. And reload that page. Okay, so that worked. So why did it not work for the PHP? I turned it into a PHP file. Worked on my other example. Let me just double check what I had. No, I'm sure that was correct. Let's try that again. Question mark PHP. And then you probably noticed it already, I just can't notice it. Let's try that and see what happens. Oh, I forgot to do the echo command, that's why. Aha, nice. Okay, so now that we're doing proper PHP, if I want to remember that if we want to generate any HTML stuff in PHP, we need to use the echo tag. So we need to go echo, and this is awesome. So we'll just start with that just to make sure that that actually works. So echo that, reload that. Yep, so there we got which is awesome. So now we can include some tags in here. So let's put in a P tag. Let's put a /P at the end here. And he deserves some chocolate. and let's put H1 around chocolate, because I'm giving you a big hint here. Okay, save that. Now it should work. Boom, there you go, and there's our H1 tag for chocolate. Okay, so you can see how we can now create the HTML code in the PHP, but we can create HTML code in the PHP, but it's the HTML file which is displaying that information through JavaScript, which is the whole point of the PHP. And so you only change the bit that you want. Okay, so you can create any valid HTML code in PHP now using the echo command. So how do we now do it so that we can connect to a database and then display the information from the database using our ajax request? So I've got a process DB PHP file, so I'm just going to change the script to use process DB. In actual fact, you can put it directly in here without using a variable. So we can go process.db, not process.db.php. Now that should work, so you don't have to use a variable. You can put the file name directly here. Okay, so our process DB file, what we need in here is all the standard stuff. So we might just grab from coursework 4 this stuff. I need to put the PHP tag in. Cool. So that just sets up the error logging stuff for PHP. So we all know we should do that. Then we need to do the connection stuff. So remember back to coursework 4, we need to do the $con bit. So $con equals mysqli underscore connect, and because I'm using MAMP, I put localhost here. If you're using web app, you'll put webapp.cms. whatever it is it's supposed to be, comma, root for the username, comma, root for the password, comma, and my database name is Kanji. Okay, comment there. So connect to the database. Check if the connection was successful. So this is all, you should already have all of this stuff in your code from coursework 4, so you can probably just copy and paste it. So if $con equals false, then it wasn't connected properly and we should die. Okay, we're dead. So awesome. Now once that's done, if you remember back to coursework 4, we want to set up a query to retrieve information from our database. So create a query to retrieve data from the database. So in my MySQL PHP admin, if I go to my Kanji database, so here's the tables for coursework 4. So I've got the user table here, which has got username and password. So that makes sense. We'll just kind of practice on that, being able to display the username and password into our web page. So let's have a look at doing that. So so we want to go $query is equal to select star, which means everything from user. So hopefully all those lovely memories of Comp 233 are flooding back and filling you with warm feelings. Next step, check to see if any rows were returned back from the database. So use an if statement for that, going if. No, I didn't execute the query yet. I thought I'd missed out something. So we need to execute the query. So we're going to go $result is equal to mysqli underscore query, and we're going to run $query on the database. Now check if any rows are returned back. So if $result does not equal false, it means that we have some rows. Else, if we get to the else statement, then it means that an error has occurred. So we could display an error here. What could we return back? We could go echo. There was, it wasn't an error, it's just no rows returned back, wasn't correct. So there were no, let's just go there was no data. I don't know. Think of a good error message for that. Okay, now if the result is not false, it means we have some rows. So what we can do is use a while loop to loop through all the results, all the rows in the result variable. So if you remember back, so loop through all the rows in the result variable. Use a while loop for that, so while. So we pull out a row by going $row equals mysqli underscore fetch array. So I think you can use fetch assoc, but that returns back a key data pair. Whereas if you use fetch array, it returns the row back as an array, and then you can use array index notation to access the data. So fetch array, we want to fetch from $result, comma, and we want to put mysqli underscore num. I'm not too sure why we need to put that, but I think it's because we want the indexes to be numbers from my vague memory, but I'm not entirely sure. But you just need it, so just stick it in. You can look it up. Okay, and what we want to do now is just display that data out to the web page by echoing it. So we can go echo. Okay. So remember, the username will be in column 0 or array position 0, and the password will be array position 1. So I can go echo $row and then just use index notation, so $row 0. Maybe put a space in between it, then go $row 1 to display the password. So that loops all the way through until we've finished all of that. Then we stop, and I guess we should close the connection. So mysqli underscore close, and we're closing $con. Alright, so let's save that and see if we get some basic database functionality happening on our web page. So reload that, click process, an error has occurred. Okay, something's gone wrong. Dun, dun, dun. Process DB. That one's got process DB. That all looks good. Done something wrong somewhere. Is there any errors in the PHP errors? Here we go. call to undefined function mysqli connect. Misspelt it. Just double check all my answers over here. Yes, mysqli. So don't forget the spelling. Okay, let's try that again. Reload. There was no data. Okay, so that's interesting. So just double check the name of the table. That's called user, so that's correct. Select star from user, so that should be okay. Okay, I'll just pause the recording again and just figure out what's gone wrong. Okay, figured it out. When I do the query, I forgot to put $con here. Noob error. I'm sure you all knew that. Okay, so $con and query. So run that query on that connection. It's better. So let me execute that. Click process. Still something happened. Let's go back and check the PHP errors. Call to undefined function. Okay, misspelled mysqli again. That's terrible. Where is it? There. Okay, if it doesn't turn blue in brackets, then you know there's an error there. Okay, the rest of that looks good. Let me do that. Reload. Click that. Woohoo! There we go. We've got Luke Jedi, Mel Firefly, Will Enterprise. Okay, so I just have to go and do something. So I will do the last part where we generate a table through PHP to display that information a bit more nicely. So I'll do that in a part 2 recording. So I'll be back soon.